Hello, this is Josh Patel, and today I'm bringing you another biology lesson or review. Today we will be doing Chapter 2, Chemistry of Life, Lesson 3, Carbon-Based Molecules. So this is a kind of complicated lesson. Well, it's not complicated, but we need to remember a lot of information, so be prepared. So our key concept for today is carbon-based molecules are the foundation of life. So we are going to learn 4 types of carbon-based molecules in this video and how they are the foundation of life. So carbon atoms have unique bonding properties. If you took chemistry, we would already know this. So you would know carbon forms covalent bonds with up to 4 other atoms, including other carbon atoms. So 4 is a lot for atoms, and other atoms like hydrogen atoms or other nitrogen atoms or any other atom can't doesn't have the same properties as carbon does, so they won't be able to bond with up to 4 other molecules. So carbon can bond with many things. That's why it's very essential to life. Carbon-based molecules have 3 general types of structures, which we will also learn. So these are the structures. There's a straight chain, a branched chain, and a ring. So you can remember it's like bling. You have 2 chains and a ring. So the straight chain is this one on the very left. It's just straight. It doesn't bend or curve. Branched chain has one horizontal, one vertical, but it doesn't have to be always one horizontal, one vertical. That's just how this one is. So it's straight, but then it also has a branch. And then we also have the ring, which in this case is a hexagon. So it's circular. So many carbon-based molecules are made of many small subunits bonded together. So most things are made of many other things. So it's just like any other thing. It's built up of smaller things. So monomers are the individual subunit. So they're the smallest part. So they're the building block. And polymers are made of many monomers. So poly is many, and mono is one. So monomers are the smaller unit, the individual subunits. In this picture, each little hexagon makes up the polymer, which is the whole chain, and we can see it's a straight chain. So we need to know this vocab. It's very important. Mono is one, so it makes up the bigger polymer. 4 main types of carbon-based molecules are found in living things. So now we're going to start learning about the 4 different carbon-based molecules. So carbohydrates are the first one. So carbohydrates are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. We have to remember this. So we can kind of remember it by carbo, sounds like carbon, so it's made of carbon. And then it also has the hydrate part, so carbo and hydrate. So you can tell it's carbon and hydrogen. And then the oxygen, it doesn't really say anything like oxygen, but there's a O in between carbon and hydrogen, so we can remember there's an oxygen in there. So carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and this is how it's formed. It's the ring out of our 2 chains and a ring. Sorry. So this is the ring. So glucose C6H12O6 can be ring-shaped and is often shown as a simplified hexagon. So this is the simplified hexagon, and glucose is a carbohydrate. So carbohydrates include starches and sugars, and if we think, what do sugars and starches do? They give us energy. So we can kind of infer on the function. So let's infer. So sugars and starches give us energy, and energy is a type, or sugars and starches is a type of fat. So carbohydrates is a fat. So monosaccharides are simple sugars. So monosaccharides are what? Monomer or polymers. If they're simple sugars and they make up something bigger, complex sugars, they have to be a monomer, and it says monosaccharide. So mono is 1, monomer is also 1. So polysaccharides include starches, cellulose, and glycogen. So poly is many, and it's made of many monosaccharides. So it's the bigger one, so it's the polymer. So if we go back, the monosaccharide would be each one of the hexagons, and the polysaccharide is the whole thing. So each one is a simple sugar, makes up a complex sugar like starch. So just remember starch, just familiarize yourself with these words. You gotta know what a monosaccharide is, which is a simple sugar. So this is our carbohydrate, all the sugar she's putting on. Carbohydrates usually give us quick energy, unlike the next carbon-based molecule, which we will learn about. So carbohydrates are fast and quick energy, so usually before a big run, runners have a big pasta dinner, which is full of a bunch of carbohydrates, the starchiness and everything. Those are all carbohydrates, so they're quick sugars for their next run. So they don't last that long, they're very quick. So carbohydrates can be broken down to provide energy for cells, which we inferred earlier. Some carbohydrates are part of cell structure, so carbohydrates can also incorporate it in the structure of our cells. So the polymer, starch, polymer is the bigger piece, stores food for plants, which is the potato. The potato stores food. So that's how carbohydrates are in potatoes. Starch is a polymer, glucose monomers, that often has a branch structure. So starch is the polymer and it has a branch structure, and it's made of the glucose monomer. So another polymer, cellulose, is used for building structures in plants. So if you already know, cellulose it builds up the cell wall. So cellulose is a carbohydrate, and the carbohydrate builds the cell wall. So cellulose is a polymer, the bigger one, of glucose monomers. So glucose makes up cellulose. As we know, glucose is a simple sugar, which also is a monosaccharide that has a straight rigid structure. So glucose is the monosaccharide which makes up cellulose, which is a polymer, but it can also be the other way around. You could say cellulose is the monomer of a cell wall, because cellulose builds up the cell wall. So lipids are our next carbon-based molecules. So lipids are a nonpolar molecule. As we learned, nonpolar means it's balanced or it's symmetrical. The structure is symmetrical. It doesn't have positive charge or negative charge. It's equal, it's balanced. So it's a nonpolar molecule that includes fats, oils, and cholesterol. And if we see fats, oils, and cholesterol, all types of like fatty ingredients, fats. So many contain carbon chains called fatty acids. So there's going to be a couple different acids coming up. So we need to remember fatty acids go with lipids. So fatty, fat, and lipids are our type of fat. So fats, oils, and cholesterol, fatty. So it's a fatty acid. So it's also made of carbon, which is why they're carbon-based molecules. And we need to know that lipids are a chain. And if you remember what a carbohydrate is, it was the ring. It was the only ring we're going to learn about. This one's a chain. So fats and oils contain fatty acids bonded to glycerol, which we don't really need to know that much about. Just know that's a fatty acid. So we don't need to understand this picture yet. Lipids have several different functions. So if we think, what are the functions of fats? They usually are long-term storage for energy. That's exactly what lipids are. They're broken down as a source of energy. So, but this type of energy lasts a long time. So lipids stay for the long run. They stay with you for a while, like fat. Your fat stays with you. It just sits there. Unlike carbohydrates, carbohydrates are quick energy. They're like fast. They just go away after you use them. Lipids are a source of energy that stays for the long term. So that's the main difference between carbohydrates and lipids. So make up cell membranes, as we will learn later in the next chapter, which we learn about cells, is that the cell membrane, which is the outside covering of cell, it protects the cell, is made up of lipids, or phospholipids. So this right here with my arrow says a phospholipid, which we will learn about in the next slide. So the cell membrane, which is this whole picture, is made up of a 2-phospholipid bilayer, bi meaning 2, so one on each side, and this is what makes up the cell membrane. So that's another reason how lipids, which is a carbon-based molecule, makes up life. And this was in our key concept, which said carbon-based molecules are the foundation of life, and we need cells, or cells make us up. So, and it's also used to make hormones, but we don't really need to know. Just remember, if you're gonna remember one of these, remember it makes up a cell membrane, because this is probably gonna be on the test. I haven't seen hormones on it, but you need to know that also. But cell membrane is more important. So, next, fats and oils have different types of fatty acids. And as we remember, fatty acids are the monomer, mono is one, so it's the monomer of lipids. So there's two different types. There's saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. So if you think saturated means it has a lot of one thing, it's like concentrated with something. So saturated, it's concentrated with one thing. So let's read this. Saturated fats contain fatty acids in which all carbon-to-carbon bonds are single bonds. So if we think, how can we connect this? Saturated is, if you think of saturated solution, it's full of one thing. It's like saturated. It has as much as it as you can have. So we can think of saturated fatty acids are saturated with single carbon-to-carbon bonds. So all the carbon-to-carbon bonds have just one dashed line, which is the bond. So it's made up of just one. It's saturated with a bunch of one bonds, except for this C to O, but it's carbon to oxygen, but it says carbon to carbon, so we don't bother with that. Just look at all the other carbon to carbon bonds. It's all saturated with just one bond. And then unsaturated means it doesn't have much of anything. That's how you can think of it. Unsaturated fats and fatty acids with at least one carbon to carbon double bond. So it's not saturated with just a single bond. It has a double bond. So it's not saturated with anything. It's unsaturated. So it has a little bit of both. So you can't say it's saturated with double bonds, or you can't say it's saturated with single bonds, so it's unsaturated. That's a cheesy way to remember it, but it works. So phospholipids make up all cell membranes. As we learned, phospholipids a type of lipid, which makes up the cell membrane. So polar phosphate head and the nonpolar fatty acid tail. So the polar head is this part right here, and the nonpolar tail. So there's two parts to the phospholipid, and these make up the cell membrane, as we saw back here. This is the phospholipid, polar head, nonpolar tail, and they just intertwine with each other, opposite directions, and that's what makes up the cell membrane. And it gives it special qualities, which we will learn about in the next chapter. So now we know two different types of carbon-based molecules, one as being carbohydrates and the other as lipids. We know they're both fats, but carbohydrates, if you remember, which is the first one we learned, has a special shape and it's a ring, but lipids, or chains, and they're both fats, but lipids last for a long period while carbohydrates are short, and those are the main difference. And you can remember that Lipids include fats and oils, while carbohydrates is sugar and starches. So those are the two main differences, but we still have two more carbon-based molecules to go. There is a lot of information in this lesson, so watch it a couple times if you can. Proteins is the next carbon-based molecule we will learn about. So proteins are polymers, which is the bigger piece, of amino acid monomers. They write it so complicated. So amino acids, which is another type of acid, we already learned about one. So amino acid is the monomer, so mono is one, so the smaller piece. Amino acids make up proteins, which is the polymer. So not to get confused with the other acid we learned, which was called a fatty acid. Fatty acids have to go with a fat, which is lipids. So lipids is the fat, and fatty acids go with it, because lipids are fats and oils. Fatty acid matches with the fats, so that's how you can remember it. And amino acids, if you already know, they like build up in your muscle when you work out, and that's what makes it sore after a while. So amino acids build up in your muscle, and you need proteins for your muscles. So that's a way you can remember amino acids go with proteins, or they're the monomer of proteins. So 20 different amino acids are used to build up proteins. So there are a lot of proteins, but there's only 20 different amino acids. So that must mean you can make up a bunch of different combinations, like attach the amino acids in different ways to build up these proteins. So this is the structure of a protein. To me it looks like a spider or an X, and it's a special shape. It's not one of it's a straight chain kind of. And so it kind of looks like a spider to me, but it's a chain. So the red letters here, OH and CH2, are two different amino acids, and they're bonded this certain way to make up a certain protein. If there were in a different way, or there was like a third one, it would be a different protein. And there's only 20 of these red ones, but they can be formed in different ways to make up different proteins. So amino acids differ in side groups or the R group. So we need to remember the R group is with proteins. So in this structure here, the red letters are the amino acids, or this is the R group, what I'm circling, the two red, or the amino acids. So that's the R group. And we can also write it like this. If you don't want to write, if there's like too many amino acids or you just don't feel like writing them all, sometimes scientists just put in R's to represent the R group or the amino acids. So the R group is a red flag that it's a protein. If you remember proteins have R's, you will remember that the R group makes it a protein. So sometimes you might have a test question that it has like 4 different pictures, and you have to pick which one's a protein, which is an amino acid, and a lipid, or one of the 4 carbon-based molecules. A good way to remember that it's protein is you just look for the R, or you look for the X shaped. Sometimes they'll be mean to you and not give you the R, and they'll just write it like this. So just remember the shape of it. It's like an X or a straight chain. So amino acids are linked by peptide bonds, which we will learn about in a later chapter. Peptide bonds are just what bonds the amino acids together, and it's how they form. That's how it forms with peptide bonds. So just remember the name peptide bonds. So proteins differ in the number and order of amino acids, like I said. If you change the number of these amino acids or the arrangement, it'll be a different amino acid. Even though there's only, it'll be a different protein. Even though there's only 20 amino acids, there are so many different ways you can put all of them together to make a whole lot of amino acids. A lot of combinations of proteins. So amino acids, so wait, okay, let's just think about this. So if amino acids are the only way the proteins differ, then the whole other part of the protein will be the same. So the R group is the only thing that changed. All the other letters will stay like that. It'll always be this shape. The R group is the only thing that changes. So amino acids interact to give a protein its shape, which we learned about. So incorrect amino acids change a protein structure and function. So if you add one or take away one or just switch around to the whole protein changes, the structure and function. This is just a picture of one. This is the hydrogen bond and it shows how it makes it like that. Nucleic acids are polymers of monomers called nucleotides, so they make it sound so confusing. I don't know why they do this. So we have to break it down. So nucleic acids are the last carbon-based molecule we will learn about in this lesson, and the last one you would really need to know in biology. And so it's another type of acid, so it makes it more confusing. But if we just remember, what are the three types of acids that we learned in this video, which are fatty acids, amino acids, and nucleic acids. So if you remember what fatty acids go with, there's a hint in the name fatty. They go with the fats and sugars, which go with lipids. So fatty for lipids, because lipids is a type of fat. Then there are amino acids, which are in your muscles, so they must go with proteins. And now we're learning about yet another one, nucleic acids. So we'll learn more about this now. So nucleic acids are polymers, so they are the bigger structure. And the monomer is called a nucleotide. So you can kind of match these up easily because they both have the prefix nucleic and nucleotides. They both have nuclei, so you can match them up together, and it kind of just sounds right together. Nucleic acids go with nucleotides. And you just need to remember, nucleic acids are the polymer, or the bigger substance, and nucleotides make it up. So this, if you recognize it, is a picture of, let's look at this. If you see an ATGC, these are what make up DNA. These are the inner parts, the bonds together, the genes. This is DNA. And so if you cut this in half, each piece, so the circle, the pentagon, and these two pentagon and hexagons together, the whole piece, all three of those parts together, is one nucleotide. So nucleotides make up your DNA, or nucleic acids. Nucleotides are made of a sugar, phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. So this is one nucleotide, and each one of these is a sugar, phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. So this is the phosphate group, the circle. We need to remember which shape corresponds with which group. And then the pentagon is the deoxyribose, and you need to know that's a sugar. You can't just remember it's a sugar, we have to remember it's deoxyribose. And it's in the word DNA, deoxyribose, nucleic acid. And then this is the nitrogen base. You don't have to know nitrogen containing molecule called a base, just know nitrogen base. It's way simpler. So how to remember these? This is the hard part. So the circle is the phosphate group. A way to remember it is you can like draw a P out of it. If you just draw a line here, it'll be a P. So it has two P's. It has three P's and it has O's, so it's like roundish. So phosphate group, just write a P there, phosphate. And then the deoxyribose is the sugar. We just need to remember this. And nitrogen base, since it has like two words kind of, you can remember there's two parts to it. There's this part and that part. They're attached. Nitrogen base. That's a good way to remember it. Or you can just make up your own silly ways to remember these. So we need to know phosphate group, nitrogen base, and sugar, and which one corresponds with which. So the circle is a phosphate group, the pentagon is the deoxyribose sugar, and the nitrogen containing molecule, or the nitrogen base, is the one with two different pieces. So nucleotides are made of a sugar, phosphate group, and nitrogen base. We just learned that. DNA and RNA are types of nucleic acids. So nucleic acids and nucleotides make up DNA and RNA. So DNA stores genetic information. Hopefully you already knew that. And it stores it in order to express a gene. RNA must be made of DNA. So RNA is made of DNA. So this is an image of nucleotides forming RNA to make a gene or protein, which we won't get into depth with now, but we will eventually learn in like one of the last few chapters. So RNA is a disposable copy of a single gene. One strand of RNA builds one protein. So RNA is made from DNA, so this is RNA forming from the DNA. And the RNA goes and builds a protein, and a protein is one of the 4 carbon-based molecules we learned about. So this is just showing how this turned into this, and this is the RNA piece, which goes and makes a protein in a process which we will learn later, not in this chapter. So if we want to review a little bit, which we should, so let's start with carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are made of what? If you look in the name, it has carb, so that's carbon. It has hydrogen for the hydrate, and it has oxygen. So it's made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And it includes starches and sugars, which are found in like fruits and nuts and simple fats like candy. So this is short-term energy, which lasts a really short time, and runners use it a lot, and so it can be broken for energy. And the structure of this is the ring. And then we have lipids, which is a nonpolar molecule. If you think of phospholipid, it has a nonpolar head and polar head and nonpolar tails. So lipids are long-term fats which stay for a while. Their structure is a straight chain, and they contain fatty acids. They also include fats and oils and cholesterol, which matches the fatty acid. And it's broken down as a source of energy that lasts a long time. And there's 2 types of fatty acids. There's saturated and unsaturated. And if we remember, saturated is saturated with a bunch of carbon-to-carbon single bonds, while unsaturated has at least one double carbon-to-carbon bond. So you can't say it's saturated with single bonds, or you can't say it's saturated with double bonds. So it has a little bit of both. And then the main thing to remember about this is lipids make up our cell membrane, which is the outside covering of the cell. That's very important. So our next type of molecule is our proteins, which make up our muscles. They include amino acids, and the shape is kind of like a spider or an X, and which is supposed to be a branch, not a branch, a straight chain. And then the important thing, the special thing about the structure of this is it has an R group, which is a dead giveaway that it's a protein. And in the R group are amino acids bonded in many different ways to produce many different proteins. But there are only 20 different amino acids. So proteins make enzymes. They are used for muscle movement, and they transport oxygen. Proteins basically just do everything in our body. And the amino acids are linked by a special bond called peptide bonds, and that's just the way they're made, which we will learn about later in a different chapter. So, and then lastly, we have nucleic acids, which are made of nucleotides, and they're used in our DNA. And there are three pieces of it. There's a phosphate group, a deoxyribose sugar, and a nitrogen base. And if we remember, the phosphate group has to be the circle, because that's what you use to make a P. And then there's also a sugar, which is the deoxyribose sugar, and that's the one by itself, just the regular pentagon, because it's just one word and it's by itself. And then there's also the nitrogen group, which has two words, so it must be the one with two parts. And then it's the pentagon and the hexagon like attached to each other. And these are all used in DNA and RNA, and the functions of DNA is to store genetic information, and the function for RNA is to build proteins. And so that's it for nucleic acids, but there's also another special vocab we need to know, which is polymers and monomers. We need to know the difference. Monomers has mono, which is one, so it must be the smaller piece that makes up polymers, which poly means many, so we need many monomers to make up a polymer. So this is the end of the video on Chapter 2, Chemistry of Life, Lesson 3, Carbon-Based Molecules. Hope you enjoyed the video and hope you learned a lot. And if you missed anything, make sure to go back and watch the video a couple times, because this video has a lot of information and it's kind of complicated to get it all in one shot. Our next video will be on Chapter 2, Chemistry of Life, Lesson 4, which is all about chemical reactions, which is way simpler than this video. So make sure you see the next video, and good luck in your quest in biology.